so that, because I think we need to broadcast in order to see, maybe? I don't know.
It's not.
I'm broadcasting now.
You're live with
Yep.
attendees.
Yes, it says live now, and it did have ID on it. But just as a final note, Ellen, the website is all messed up.
Okay, I will check it after the webinar.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, we might want to have a call with them. I'd like to have a call with them.
Sure.
Actually. Morgan, thank you for coming and making it. I'm sure you're crazy busy.
Just as you are, I'm sure, but you know, we have to make time to try to get the information out there and help as many people as possible.
Yes, and things change daily.
They do. I just yesterday I was in a webinar and was talking about one of the forgiveness components of approved expenses in the CARES Act that for using the CARES Act for payments on other debt obligations, interest on other debt obligations, and about how that's not eligible for forgiveness. And I put my foot in my mouth on that one.
Yeah.
Because the guidance has come down that it's not a forgiveness eligible expense now. So
yeah, I know I keep checking. I mean, I was up until 1:30 kind of checking and then like rechecking and like, wait a minute. So do, small business employers who are just like a single LLC, they're not like registered as a S corporation and things, do they have to file separately, or are they filing under their entity? Because I've received two different things. So yeah. I think that's why we have to say in the beginning, things change and the lender may look at things differently than what may be in the rules.
They do. Well, and thanks to everyone, all the panelists who are joining us and listening in.
Yes, yeah, it looks like we have 16. I'm just going to give it just a few more minutes. So I know we're live, and thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah.
And, go ahead, Morgan.
I was just going to say, if anyone has specific questions about the PPP or how it relates to you, if you want to go ahead and start putting those questions in chat now, definitely make sure we address them as we go through the various portions.
Yes, I was going to get to that, but I'm happy that you mentioned it. Ellen is going to monitor. Ellen's on the call, or on the webinar rather, with us, and she'll just jump in with the questions and she'll monitor those, Morgan, for us.
Excellent.
And
nice
so
to have an Ellen.
It is. It's very nice to have Ellen. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
So what are we at? I might just give it a couple more minutes. I'll go ahead and introduce myself, Christine Ferraris, an attorney here in Tucson, trying to get information out. As you can see by the title, we're focusing in more on the Paycheck Protection Program, or commonly known as the PPP loan, and then the EIDL loan, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. So the interesting thing about the webinar today is we got new money coming through, but the applications themselves aren't live. But we're hoping, at least, I don't know if you've heard differently, Morgan, but I'm hoping that they're going to stay the same relatively, that they're still going to be pretty straightforward, kind of 1.5 pagers. And but we do have a sample of the PPP that I'll share with everyone. And there's plenty of EIDL. I have a really interesting EIDL loan YouTube to refer folks to by a CPA. He talks about how easy it is to fill out the EIDL loan application.
And I think I think we're seeing a boost in funding to the EIDL program as well coming.
Yes, yeah, not as much as the PPP, but definitely. I think it was, I don't know, I heard 60 something, and I don't know, I don't want to put zeros behind that, but it's a lot of money. And yeah, so I'm going to go, pardon?
I was just going to say, out of curiosity, as we jump into this, anybody who's listening in as a panelist, if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat there, status, if you applied for a PPP, if you were granted, if you were funded. I'm really curious to see where everyone is on that, and that can kind of help.
Yeah, I am too. And I did get a couple of questions before the webinar, earlier in the week. And if folks are open to it, I think we can unmute them. Ellen, can we unmute folks so that they can, if they want to share where they are in the process, and actually talk about it? I'd be happy to hear what they have to say too, if that's something that's available to us today.
Yeah. We did get one question that just came in from Patty. Do you want to take a quick address it before we jump in, or do you want to hold on to these until we kind of get further in?
Let me just go through and make sure I get through what we, just so other folks who want to answer or ask questions, they press *9 if you're calling in. That will prompt us to see that you're raising your hand. Just some housekeeping things, but I'll be happy to address that question, Morgan. I think that's a great idea. We have two forms of submitting questions, either in the chat, which is on the side if you're familiar with a Zoom webinar, and then down below you should see a toolbar that says Q&A, and you can put your question in there. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. We're not going to stop on question and answers, and we will have a question and answer at the end. But if something comes up and you want to put it in the chat, we'll try to address it as we go through the program. Morgan, I just wanted to thank you again. You're awesome. You know a lot about all this stuff. I've had fellow colleagues who have said the same, and I appreciate you coming here today to help share some helpful information for folks to jump back in now that the applications are going to be open again, thankfully.
Well, thank you
Thank you again. And I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide that shows if I can do that. I keep going to my other, and why don't you go ahead and read the question, Ellen?
Okay.
Yeah.
Signed up for a coach through SCORE. They said it would be within 2 weeks before I should expect a call back. The local women's business coaching place has a disconnected phone number. I heard that you should go to a financial institution you have a relation with. Went to B of A. They handed me a page that says all SBA will be online. It says you must have had a small business checking since February 15th, 2020. For a true small business, where should they turn?
I'm going to have an email or website for different banks that are doing different things. I actually went through and applied through one of these lenders that's at this website, and they processed it. They may be holding it, it opens up, but there's a website. I think it's called Smart Assets. I'll make sure we put it in the chat there. I too, I'm not sure who the person is, but I too had wanted to check out to see what local sources there are, and I haven't call each of these organizations, the Women's Business Center, and we just discover as well that it was disconnected. And so I'm a bit disappointed, I have to say, in the local resources that are available relative for small businesses. But I know part of the challenge, as it is with the lenders and as it is with the government, as we have seen, everything is so new and there hasn't been a procedure or a process, so people actually don't know how to guide folks. And that's one of the reasons Morgan and I have been spending a lot of time in this last month and a half trying to get information out there, because there isn't a lot of specific information, and I'm hoping that we can, provide you with some resources to help inform yourselves. And hopefully, there are some lenders will do better than others. I can speak that the lender that I actually have, I won't say who it is, but I had gone to them maybe 2 weeks ago and asked about the programs that were coming through or were actually available, received nothing. So it's not you, it's just the where we are right now. But there is a lot of information online, and I'm hoping that if you have a specific question relative to where you are in the process, as Morgan said, I'm happy to take that question after the webinar, put it in the chat room if it's something specific, and we'll try to address that in the webinar. And if you don't get it addressed in the webinar, follow up with us and I'll make sure you get the right resources, or Morgan will. If I can't, I will ask her.
And my quick take on this question from Patty, the best place to go first is going to be any banker that you have an existing relationship with. Okay, we're seeing across the board that anybody who has an existing relationship with a bank is being prioritized. If you have an existing relationship with a bank that was already an SBA approved lender, that's definitely the first place to go. But a lot of smaller banks, community banks, credit unions are getting access to the SBA system that they didn't have before and that they didn't have during this first round of funding. So this new funding that I know Christine is going to be talking about here in a moment, this new bill that's coming down, there's a portion of funds that are earmarked specifically for those smaller community lenders to really kind of help a lot of small business owners that don't have a pre-existing condition with a major bank. That was really a bad barrier of entry to you being able to get in touch with one of the big four and try to get your application processed. So there's some hope that that's going to be a little bit better with the second round of funding. In this question, I know you mentioned that they handed you a page that says all SBA will be online. There's a little bit of confusion about different types of loans, and we'll break that down in a second. But for the PPP, you are going to need to go through a lender like a bank, not directly through the SBA. It's going to need to be a bank that's approved to participate in the program. And yes, a lot of the banks, like you mentioned, they're going to prioritize anybody who's had a pre-existing relationship with them. So that's definitely the best place to be looking.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, if you have a relationship with a smaller bank, generally speaking, that is where you want to go, because they're going to, as Morgan said, they'll generally prioritize you. They may not have their systems up in order, but they should be transparent, and you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions specific to anyone in the bank. You know, call them up specifically and ask them, you know, where are they, what challenges are they facing, should you go apply somewhere else. And as I said, there's some lenders out there that you do not have to have a relationship that are on it, and they are processing either, generally speaking, the PPP program. Now the EIDL loan program, that's something that you go right to the SBA website and fill out like a one-page application. But again, that's not open yet, but hopefully it will soon be. I'll go ahead and, if we don't have any, is there any other questions in the chat right now?
There's several, but maybe we should get through the first portion and then we can work our way through.
Yep, that sounds fine. I will. So generally speaking, all this funding comes under the CARES Act. That's the federal loan that was passed by Congress that you hear about out there. CARES is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And that's the federal law that provided a lot of incentives, because they're guaranteeing the loans 100%. Now that's before, when there were disaster loans, they may have guaranteed 80%, but now they're guaranteeing 100%. So that means the loans, or the banks, have nothing to really lose. You know, the government's going to pay. Should somebody default, the government's behind that loan. So it created, and it created new loans in terms of this PP loan. The rigorous process that they had in place before is not there. We don't have the collateral, the personal guarantees that normally were required under SBA loans. And it allows you to receive forgiveness under both programs. So generally speaking, there's 4 different kinds of loans. If you go to the SBA website at sba.gov, it's a pretty good website, I have to say. There's a lot of information there, and they have these different sorts of loans. They have if you have an existing relationship, you can go for the SBA Express Bridge Loan, which is supposedly a faster process. I haven't heard much about that. Morgan, have you heard much about the SBA
Express Bridge
Loan process?
So the Express Bridge Loan was actually kind of like a pilot program that they brought into effect a couple of years ago. And I think that the idea was that the Paycheck Protection Program was actually, in the grant part of the EIDL, was going to kind of take the place of the bridge loans. So I actually haven't been hearing anything about people processing bridge loans, or I think that the grant program is meant to have kind of taken the place of the bridge program right now.
Right. And so we're going to dive into, most of the talk today will be about the Paycheck Protection Program because of its forgiveness component, and it's such a large forgiveness component. But we will also look at the EIDL loans, which is also an important loan that you can apply for, and you can apply for both. So what we're talking about are low interest loans, right? 1% under the PPP program, and 3.5% under the EIDL program. And for nonprofits, it's or not 3.5, 3 3/4. So they allocated another $320 billion for the program, for the debt relief program, just the overall program. And they have broken it down into, most of the money is going towards the PPP loan because the Paycheck Protection Program, because they want to protect payroll. And that's where the forgiveness comes in. If you keep and spend most of the money on payroll, that's where you're going to get the forgiveness. So I have this website here, And Ellen, if you could put it in the chat, people can then copy and paste it. It's called the smartasset.com insights. And this is where I found anyway, that there are PPP loan lenders that you can apply online. And a lot of them don't have specific relationship requirements, or if they do, it's a quick process. And so go there and you'll see a list of loans, and there's a little summary on each of those lenders. You know, what they require, you know, their general process. If it's, most of them, at least what I found when I researched them, they have a quick process. I think I applied through, I think it was in Utah, and it took me 15 minutes, and I received an email this morning asking for some additional documents about a payroll processing company that allowed me to be able to have that. So speaking of that, the person that's going to be key is your bookkeeper and your CPA, to make sure that you get the right documents together and submit it, you know, efficiently, so that the loan gets processed. So you want to start talking to them, or if you do it yourself, I'll mention some of the documents that you want to have, and can speak to that too, based on her background and experience. As far as the EIDL loan, I'm going to start with that. You can get a max loan of $2 million. I know we're speaking to smaller business owners here, but it's good to know exactly what the maximum is. There's no collateral at all. It's basically your credit score, you know, your business's credit score, if you do have a business credit history, or your personal credit score. And if you are looking for a loan for $25,000 or less, there's no collateral. Generally speaking, there are not going to be any personal guarantees under the EIDL or under the PPP. The EIDL is a lot longer repayment period. The PPP is 2 years. The EIDL is 30 years. So that's something to keep in mind. The max interest is 3.75%. Nonprofits, 2.75%. What's wonderful about this too is you can have a deferred payment period for up to a year. And so that's, I mean, that's amazing. That's interest-free loan that you may need or you may not. So it makes sense to apply. And if you could just pay it back, then that's what you do. You can use it for paid sick leave, payroll, increased costs. One thing to be mindful of relative to this loan and the PPP, you can't obviously pay or seek reimbursement or forgiveness for something that you know, for the same month of payroll. It has to be used for two different sorts of expenses. Under the EIDL, they were promising $10,000, and everybody was excited. Oh, we're going to get $10,000. I'm going to get $10,000. And then they were promising to have it processed in 3 days. Now this is Congress and politicians promising, right? And so versus the SBA and the lenders who actually have to put this whole program into place. So that didn't happen, right? And then they ran out of money. So right now, what I'm understanding is that you can get $1,000 per employee. So as a self-employed person or independent contractor, you're your employee. So you can get $1,000, you know, as an advance, and that's, you know, fill out the application and they're supposed to process that quickly. Again, this is through the SBA.gov. This is not through a lender. You want to apply when the portal opens. You want to apply directly to the SBA.gov, and they make it pretty easy. It's a straightforward application. No supplementary documents, at least it wasn't when they had it originally opened at the beginning of April. You can refinance this loan under the PPP loan. So how that would work is that since the PPP loan has a 1% max, you may want to take those funds and then put it into the PPP loan and have that 1% interest rate rather than the 3.75 maximum. If that's what they actually assess you, you may get a lower interest rate. I don't know. I guess that depends on the lender and the criteria that they're looking at. Who's eligible for an EIDL loan? An individual who operates, and I'll stop after this and answer some questions if we have questions. Anybody who's a sole proprietor, an individual who works as an independent contractor, and actually anybody who's self-employed and carries on any kind of trade or business, if you can show that. I also have the couple other things that they have in the Act, the tribal business concern that meets the SBA standard, and veterans organizations.
And if I could jump in on that one too,
Sure.
the disaster loan grant is definitely what a lot of people have been really, really interested in. So it's that advanced portion that Christine mentioned that's kind of a grant program mixed in. From what I've been seeing, overall disaster loans have not really been getting processed at all, except for this grant portion. So as from what I've been seeing, anything beyond this, how many thousands of dollars you get based on your employees, any larger loans, I really haven't seen any news of that being processed. In fact, the only one that I've seen happens to be a colleague of mine who's an active military reservist and who very, very early on, right at the end of February, applied for an EIDL as an active military reservist. And about 4 weeks later, so just a week or two ago, randomly received an email that his application had been withdrawn and telling him to go seek a Paycheck Protection Program loan. That was the only correspondence he received directly from the SBA. So that was really kind of odd. But what we've been seeing, aside from the overall loan program with the EIDL, those grant portions have been getting processed. What's been weird about this is that the experience has been that people go and they fill out the streamlined application, they get a confirmation number right at the end of it, and then if any, no contact from the SBA. I've had a couple of clients who received a single confirmation email telling them weeks after they applied, telling them that they're moving on to the next phase of the loan program and that they'll be contacted. And then other than that, I've been in touch with several people who received no follow-up communication except for money hitting their bank account. And the way that that's looking, I've been hearing reports of it getting processed in the last 7 to 10 days. And essentially it's just that you log into the account that you gave them the routing information for, and it says SBA, SBA in the memo line, and it's an amount, $1,000 per however many employees that you disclosed. So if anybody has applied for it, we did see a question about that come through, and you didn't receive any confirmation, you haven't received any correspondence, I would say it's worthwhile to be checking your bank account. I've been seeing people receive those funds as much as a week ago and even more recently. So it's worth keeping an eye on. And then as Christine, go ahead, Christine.
No, I just, go ahead. I just wanted to I had a thought that there's actually the SBA portal that you can check status. I went to do it this morning. And I didn't really have a password that I remembered, and I asked for them to resend me the password, and that didn't happen. But it was a portal.
That's interesting. I was going to say
SBA status check. We'll share that on the Facebook page for sure. I tried it. It was just this morning. I tried, and I had seen it somewhere, and I searched for it actually at the SBA.gov website, but. So that might be possible to do. So we'll share that after the webinar. So go to the Facebook event. I'll put it in the comments, or if I can get it to folks before the end, I'll make sure it gets into the chat.
Interesting.
But if you actually Google it, I'm going to say if you Google SBA EIDL loan portal check, it may pop up. I think that's what I ended up doing because I couldn't find it on the SBA.gov website, but somebody referred me to it. Morgan, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish with.
That was pretty much the gist of what I wanted to express about the grant program. We did the application for our business and didn't have any sort of registration for a portal. So that's really interesting that they have one. And I'm not sure exactly how you would get access to it. But yeah, just wanted to put that in there that you might have received funds for that grant and just not known it if you're not watching.
Yeah. I know. I've been checking our bank account, and I checked this morning, and because I applied, I want to say April 2nd or 1st, right when the new application went live, I was like on it, but I've received some form email saying blah blah blah, nothing. I think I asked a question about my submission of the application, like if I could follow up or something, and they just kept sending me like just a form email that said nothing.
Okay.
And I
frustrating process all around, isn't it?
Yes. I think we can all agree on that. So who's eligible for the PPP loan? Same thing with the EIDL: sole proprietors, independent contractors, and individual who's self-employed. And here's generally the requirements that you have to show: that you were in operation on February 15th, 2020. Your primary place of residence is in the United States. Now, I know I've heard different folks who live, outside the country and who run U.S. businesses, and so they're really not happy with this requirement, but that's what they decided is a requirement. Generally speaking, it's your Schedule C that you're going to look to for 2019. Now, if you don't have a Schedule C for 2019, there's I think it's the January 1st to February 29th sort of scope of period of time they'll look at your wages or your salary. Here's some of the documents down there on check number 4, a 1099 miscellaneous for non-employment compensation, and other documents, just something to show that you received money as, in terms of, the business that you're working under. But again, you have to have been in business or have a document showing that you were as of February 15th, 2020. So how much can you borrow under the PPP program? Again, it depends on, that period of time that you're using for your calculation, but essentially it's 2.5 times, it's 2.5 times your salary, just to say it easily, your wages, whatever you can show. So what I've heard, distributions and draws are not considered part of that calculation. That said, if you have somebody advocating for you and helping you put your application together, I'm sure you could argue that that is, a wage. But generally speaking, the guidelines that they put out, they're not considering those amounts. Now, Morgan, have you heard differently on that?
Yeah, what they're considering for this, because there's sole proprietors, and then of course there's like S Corp owners are a big one, who sometimes they have owners draw as a big portion of their income as well as their salaries through the business. Right. What they're concerned about are the portion of wages that you paid payroll taxes on. So if you are a sole proprietor, what they are wanting to look at is for 2019 or before, they want to see what you paid self-employment taxes on. If you're an S Corp owner and you're only paying yourself through owner's draws, then you are not going to be able to count that as income, unfortunately. They are wanting to see what you ran through payroll and paid payroll taxes on.
So not distributions. Distributions wouldn't qualify for that.
If you're an S Corp owner, if you're a sole proprietor, then the distributions coming out of the business, it's essentially going to be what the business sees as net income. So it's not going to be your distributions purely, because you could technically be distributing more money from the business than the business is actually earning, which has different tax implications. But it's going to be, they are going to want to take a look at P&Ls. They're going to want to see if it's for 2019 and you haven't been in business prior, if you haven't filed 2019 taxes yet, they probably are going to want to look at those 1099s to get an idea of what your income was going to be. And then whenever you do finally file taxes, whatever that net earnings from self-employment is going to be the number that they're interested in.
Right. And you don't have to have filed taxes. It's just, if you can prepare that C schedule to show and have any supporting documentation, again, they're specific about what they ask for. They have general guidelines, but you have to work that out with your lender and anybody else who's helping you put your application together.
Yeah, I do believe that most of the lenders that I've seen, they either want to see a record of 1099s from 2019 or they want to see a completed 2019 tax return. If you're just doing the 1099s, they might also want P&Ls, but just P&Ls on their own are not going to be enough from what I've been seeing.
Right.
One quick question just came in asking, since I'm an S Corp, I need to use my 1120S instead of my 1040. Is that what you're saying? Not necessarily. If you're an S Corp owner and you're trying to do the PPP application, they're going to ask you for payroll reports. And that's predominantly what they're interested in. It's going to be the 941s, the quarterly tax filings of the business, that would show what you have been paying in terms of payroll from the business overall. As an S Corp owner, your payroll should be included in that, and that is what they're going to go off of.
And I would, if you use any kind of payment processing, with my firm, we use gusto.com. They prepared a report. They had it already ready because they're saying, okay, here's your report if you're going to seek a loan. So if you're using some sort of third party, they, ask them to help you. I have an example in here. If you had net earnings, line 31 on your Schedule C of $75,000, you divide that by 12, and this is what we're talking about for 2019. which comes out to the 6,250. Then you multiply that by 2.5, and that's the maximum amount of the PPP loan that you would be eligible for. Now, smaller businesses get to add in, and this is where I was a little bit confused, Morgan. The smaller businesses, that have, more than just the one employee, they can add in the other, like the health insurance and the other payment related costs, whereas the self-employed and independent contractor can only focus on the salary because of their ability to run their expenses differently than a small business. And that's the gist of what I understand. Is that what you understand?
I think that's I believe that's the same as my understanding. Because generally speaking, for employees, same as S Corp owners, those insurance expenses would be run through wages and they would be counted that way. But as a sole proprietor, you're not running those through your wages. So it's
Right.
not going to.
One thing I have down as a last point here is that if you participate in the PPP and I think actually in any loan program, it might affect your eligibility for unemployment benefits under the FFCR. I'm going to mess that up, but anyway, under the federal act that is allowing self-employed and independent contractors to receive unemployment benefits. So just be aware of that. And it might be a question to ask the lender and to ask before you apply to the unemployment agency. And here in Arizona is the ADES, Arizona Department of Economic Security. They do have some frequently asked questions on their website that are more helpful than when this all started at the end of March. They didn't have very helpful information at all, but they've gotten much better. So here's what I created for a COVID-19 loan checklist for small business owners. And then I separated it down there. Again, I'm kind of referencing the Schedule C, the invoice, bank statements, or any book of record that can show you were in operation as of February 15th, 2020. And here's some other things that might come up. Depending, I think this is going to depend on how much you're seeking, and again, the lender. They're going to want to see, how viable your business is and how formalized you've got things in place. This isn't a hard and fast list, but it's just something to help guide those out there that to start looking for this information and putting it together for yourself. And as I said, working with a bookkeeper or lawyer or CPA. I know a lot of CPAs are helping folks get their applications processed because they have a lot of that information already available electronically and easy to collect. Here are some pointers on what lenders might be looking for. You're going to have, so the lenders themselves aren't really validating your information because they just don't have the time to do that, to be honest, and they're not on the hook. You're on the hook for what you certify. So if you're certifying that you need this money because of COVID-19, that means you're basically, if you don't need it and somehow somebody finds out, that's, you're making a false statement. So be cognizant of that. You're using them to maintain payroll and for business expenses, not to go on vacation. Not that we can go anywhere anyway right now, but just, make sure it's not on the lender, it's on you and what you represent at the bottom of, there's these questions at the bottom of the applications that that you need this money and that you're not receiving them for duplicative purposes. You're not trying to get two different loans for the same thing. And if you do get an advance, number 4 I have here, just know that that's subtracted from any forgiveness amount that you might be eligible for under the PPP loan. So forgiveness. So this is going to be I think one of the most biggest parts of the loan process, because there's the opportunity to get this money forgiven. That means it's given to you, right? And so, but you really want to keep records and document what you're using the money for. And the ratio, generally speaking, is that it needs to be 75% for payroll under the covered period between February 15th and June 30th. Now that can change. And as I think we discussed in the beginning that, we're getting daily changes, but that's been pretty consistent. The covered period is February 15th to June 30th. And that's for whatever you end up receiving, that you are either reimbursing yourself or you're using the proceeds to cover payroll, at least 75% of that loan, if you want forgiveness. Now, you can use it for other things, but you're not going to get it forgiven.
And just to add a clarification in there, there's a couple of different covered periods that are talked about in the legislation.
Yes.
Just for clarification, some people, you might hear the phrase covered period in respect to the time that you have to spend the money and apply for forgiveness. And that covered period refers to when you apply for the loan and the loan is originated. When those funds hit your bank account, the clock starts for an 8-week period. That is the 8 weeks that you have to spend the money on approved expenses, not before or not after. That's the time window that you have to utilize those funds for the approved expense list and then apply for forgiveness on that. And then, as Christine mentioned, 75% of the loan to be forgiven must be attributable to payroll costs, and that's an at least number. They want at least 75% of it to be for the payroll costs, because the loan's intention, the forgiveness's intention, is to keep people employed.
Right. Paycheck Protection Program. Just remember the name. That's really what it's for. Now, you can use it, as I have in this 4th bullet point here, for mortgage and rent, but you really want, if you want to seek forgiveness and actually receive forgiveness, you need to use it to cover your salary or to cover an employee's salary if you have any employees. I don't think I have anything else to add. We don't have any questions. I see there's a question down there. Ellen, do you want to ask that question, or?
Sure.
Maybe I can pull it up.
We have a family-owned and operated purified water and ice cream shop. We started last August, so we didn't file any taxes yet, meaning we don't have 1099s. Additionally, we haven't been seeing the kind of revenue to pay ourselves or set up an official payroll. I know we can still apply for the PPP loan, but what can be forgiven for us, and how can we increase the amount that is forgiven? We're hoping to apply strictly to keep up with our rent and pay utility bills.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the PPP loan is the right choice. I don't want to, I can't say for sure without understanding the totality of their circumstance. But I mean, the EIDL loan is available. That may be the better choice for them. A lot of people are talking about the PPP loan, and I think Morgan can speak to this too. It just, you want to take the best advantage, but you can't, if you haven't been paying payroll, then you can't just all of a sudden pay payroll. You have payroll before, and your employees change, and you have a new employee that's replacing another employee, that's okay. Or if you add more employees, but I'm not sure that the PPP is, if you can show that you have some income from the business before, and that's what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And it's not, like you mentioned, it's not something that you can get funding through the PPP purely to help with rent and utility bills. It really is geared towards the payroll. So since you started the business last year and you said you haven't filed taxes yet, the question there would be, did you have net income from the business? Even if you haven't filed taxes yet, you've got to get in touch with the lender to see what their determination would be. What is their requirement for how they're going to determine what to grant you if you're a sole proprietor? Now, let's say that when you started the business, and unfortunately I've seen this in several client cases where they've been in business or they elected to be an S Corp last year and did not pay themselves through payroll. So they technically did not meet their S Corp salary threshold requirements. They were just taking owner's draws. Since they didn't do that, since you didn't pay yourself through payroll, you didn't pay taxes. You paid income tax, but you did not pay payroll taxes on those amounts. Then you're not eligible to consider any of the draws as part of the income. And that's just a little bit of an unfortunate reality with some of the more startup businesses or S Corp owners who didn't quite understand their tax obligations. You kind of straddle that midline there between being self-employed and being an employee. And what the lenders and what the government's concerned about is what portion of your income were you paying payroll taxes on? And if there's none of that to be had, then it's unlikely that this program is going to be of benefit for you.
Yeah, but don't give up. I mean, speak to a lender about it. Because you're a new business, generally speaking, I know you don't pay quarterly taxes until you get, a determined period. And so you don't have to pay quarterly then. So I'm saying, whatever you have to show income, if you actually had income, but if you didn't take the income and actually pay for things to live, then I think you're going to run into issues. But if you can show that you actually did take some income, speak with whomever, helps you with your accounting and the lender, or if you don't have somebody, find somebody. Because that's, I think if you can be creative with some of these things. And as a lawyer, I know that's what happens with the law, is sometimes you have to have somebody advocate for you. And if you have a relationship with the bank at all, then, they may try to help you find the right loan for you. And it may be the PPP and it may not.
And we do have some questions that have been coming through chat and not the Q&A. Do you want to address those now or hold
Sure.
on?
No, sounds good.
Okay, one was I was W-2 until October 2019 and became 1099 in November of 2019. I'm receiving unemployment benefits from a job when I was a W-2 due to lack of earnings as an independent contractor up to this point. My wife is in a similar situation since January 2020. Would we qualify for the payroll protection assistance or be in jeopardy of losing our unemployment benefits?
You can't be on unemployment benefits at the same time that you're trying to take earnings through the PPP. And what it sounds like is that since you were so recently put on a 1099, if it was November, and if your wife is in a similar situation since January, that is a very, very narrow window of time. And in fact, since January, she wouldn't have had any 1099s rendered yet for the current tax year. So I think it's very unlikely that you would have much of a volume of income in order to apply for the PPP based on that subcontracting income that you had at the end of last year. However, that might not be the case. You can always pursue the PPP application. You can always ask the lender, see what they tell you as far as the application and what you qualify for, and then make a decision at that point. But from my understanding of it, you cannot be utilizing PPP income, especially as a sole proprietor, as well as unemployment. All of these programs are geared to be an either or. There's no double dipping.
Right. You can apply for both. I want to reiterate that. You can apply for both. Whether or not you'll meet the requirements either through the SBA.gov website with the EIDL loan or the lender itself under the PPP program, it's up to the lender. And yeah, it's worth trying. I think it's worth trying. And then I think there are going to be folks too that have reduced hours and so forth because of COVID-19, where their income is supplemented with unemployment, and that's a little bit of a gray area. As I said in the previous slides, you're going to your unemployment benefits are going to be affected if you apply for a loan, and vice versa. The loan will be affected by the unemployment benefits. My understanding is that your unemployment benefits will be reduced if you receive a loan.
Okay. And then we did get a question where somebody had put in about wondering if Arizona had the pandemic unemployment assistance fund yet. And I just dropped a link there. So if anyone's curious, you can look at the answered questions in the Q&A. That's a link directly to the Arizona Department of Labor website where they discuss that pandemic unemployment assistance fund. From what I'm reading on it, it's acknowledgement that the program is in place and that some links for where to apply for the various unemployment insurance programs. And as far as what kind of documentation they are going to need or when they roll out those benefits, I am not sure of that yet. I don't know if you've heard anything, Christine.
You just apply normally as you would through your state for unemployment benefits, and the federal automatically comes in. I know folks who have received the federal side, which is $600, up to $600 additional benefit.
Here in Arizona.
Here in Arizona.
Great.
The Arizona general benefit isn't that great compared to some other states. I think it's a max of $240, but the federal benefits are coming through. You don't have to apply separately for it. If you apply for unemployment benefits,
Great.
You will be automatically enrolled in the federal, because basically they're giving the money to the state. The federal government is. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's still, I think, 4 or 5 more questions. Ellen, do you want to work our way through those?
Sure. I think I filled out my PPP incorrectly. What do I do?
I thought the same. So, no, it was my idol. I thought I filled out incorrectly. You go back to the lender. You know, did you, or I mean, because you had to go through a lender if you filled it out. So just contact them and let them know. It may be something that you need to resubmit something. From what I understand, you don't get like pushed back in the line. They'll just change things up, but you need to contact your lender. It may not be significant. I don't know what you did incorrectly, but for the most part, my understanding is if you're in a certain place in a queue, that you'll stay there and they'll just supplement the application with whatever it is you need to change. But that depends on the lender. I don't know what all lenders do, but I would contact your lender right away and speak with somebody. You know, don't email them and wait for them to get back to you. Get somebody on the phone if you can.
Okay, next question. If PPP loan isn't going to work for me, did I hear you say we can file unemployment? I didn't pay self-employed tax last year. Would unemployment work for me?
Yes.
Okay.
Easy answer. Yes.
Thank you.
But you had to have been employed.
And do I have to reapply for the EIDL when the portal opens again, or does it hold my place in line? Did you just answer that?
I think it does. Did you get it? I'd like to know if they got a number. I got a number confirming that my EIDL went through and it gave me an SBA number. So I presume that I'm good, but I don't think SBA has put anything out. Have you heard anything, Morgan?
SBA, the application process is exactly the same. I would not submit another application if you
Right.
already put one in. As far as we know, that's not changed. Same thing for PPP. Everything that I've been hearing is that when this new round of funding comes through, the program itself should not have been shifted. The applications should still be the same. And in fact, I know a lot of banks are still basically processing applications. They're just not issuing approvals until word about new funding allocations comes through.
Right. And like I said, I want to send out that SBA.gov portal site and see if anybody's able to get, I'm curious if anybody's able to get actually a status report on their loan through it. And so, Ellen, could you see if you can find it and then put it in the chat?
Sure. And one more question before I
Sure.
How can I apply for the EIDL? I keep finding the $10,000 EIDL advance on the SBA.gov website, but not the loan application where I can request a specific amount of our.
Yeah, it's not open yet. It was open, but when the funding ran out, they closed it down.
And it may not open back up, just depending on how many funds become available versus what the backlog of current applications are.
That's a good point, Morgan. Very good point.
Yeah, but something to keep an eye out for. And then I see a couple of other questions here in the chat. Michelle Crow is asking, what about 501c3 orgs? Are they eligible? Do you remember which programs nonprofits are eligible for, Christine? I think that they're eligible for PPP.
Yeah, as far as I.
And I believe you're eligible for EIDL. I think nonprofits are eligible for both as long as you.
Yeah, and their interest rate on the EIDL is lower than for profit. They're at 2.75.
Right. So I believe that they're eligible for both.
And I have seen some information out there where, you know, folks are helping nonprofits specifically with these applications. And so just do like a Google search for nonprofit EIDL. I think I went to the Arizona Commerce, Commerce, I don't know, maybe through the Chamber of Commerce or something, but they had a specific resources for nonprofits and getting help. And I'm sure there are lenders specifically, and if you have a relationship with a bank already, that's who I would go to.
Yep.
And I don't find that portal when I search for the SBA lender portal.
Okay. I'm going to look at my history. So yeah. Do we have any more questions? Morgan, can you jump in with that while I look for?
Yeah, and I can actually just chat a little bit more about some of the questions and things that I've been fielding a lot lately about the PPP. And to touch base again on that, to kind of expand on the answer for, who was it? I think it was Jeanette asking about self-employment. If you didn't pay self-employment tax, would unemployment work for you? Like Christine mentioned, if you were a W-2 employee at some point last year, you might be able to apply under that. If you're self-employed, and you did not pay self-employment tax, like you didn't file taxes for it or you didn't file taxes for it yet, it's really just going to depend. This is one of those things that the CARES Act passed down some big sweeping federal mandates, but the states are kind of, they have some leadway, or they're working directly with the Fed on guidelines that we may not have seen directly yet. You're just going to have to be patient and somehow get in touch with the state office when it comes to the unemployment insurance benefits. I do know that there's some provisions in here that, because things are so bogged down and slow to process, that you should be able to get benefits in arrears if it takes a while for you to kind of get through and get confirmation of what your benefits might be. But that's just something that you're gonna have to coordinate with them on what sort of documentation they're gonna use to decide your benefits and how that's going to look. But I do think that there's a high likelihood that there's some relief there for you. A couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to the Paycheck Protection Program. Like Christine mentioned, there's a handful of approved expenses. So the payroll costs being the big one, and then there's utility and rent payments for obligations that you can prove that the business had prior to February 15th. And then there's the mortgage interest payments, okay? And I want to be very clear on that. The bill is very specific that it's for the interest portion of that debt obligation with a mortgage. You can't use it to pay down the principal, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing here, and I'm not sure, Christine, if you have seen this discussed much in some of your attorney circles, but one of the big things that is worth keeping in mind here is that when it comes to payroll costs that are eligible for forgiveness, so if you have multiple employees that you're going to be utilizing this for, the way the legislation in the CARES Act is currently written, payroll taxes and income tax withholding are not included in that calculation for eligible forgiveness amounts. And the reason that I mention that is it definitely has a strategic implication as far as employers who are trying to boost their employment levels again to make sure that they qualify for that forgiveness. Thinking about, if you were in shelter in place, if your business is shut down, if you're not generating revenue, that's something that you need to keep in mind if you're going to be trying to bring people back onto payroll. While you are going to be receiving a windfall through the Paycheck Protection Program to help cover their payroll costs, you need to be planning on the tax portion of that coming out of pocket from the business. There's been a lot of questions about this in the finance industry and in the legal community because, the spirit of this bill is in trying to help employers keep people on payroll even when they otherwise might not have. And that tax burden is fairly high for employers if they're expected to be out of pocket for all of those tax withholdings. So there's some debate about whether or not it was intended to be just the employer's portion of the payroll taxes versus all of the withholdings. And I think we're kind of waiting to see if there might be some further guidance come down about that. But the way that the law is currently written, from what I've been seeing, is all payroll tax withholdings and income tax withholdings are not eligible for forgiveness. Have you seen that discussed at all, Christine?
I haven't. I just know that it's part of the calculation. It gets to be included in the calculation because they look at the gross amount. But as far as forgiveness, yeah, I had this discussion too relative to insurance too, like the unemployment insurance. Is that an eligible forgiveness expense? And
I haven't seen unemployment insurance as being eligible, and workers' comp is not eligible. So what I've seen for the eligible payroll expenses, it's insurance premiums for health insurance is the big one, and then wages, commissions, tips, salaries, sick leave, family leave, severance pay, but not sick leave or family leave that's covered by the Families First Coronavirus Act. Which is that sick leave or family leave that was recently passed that you get a refundable tax credit for. Mm-hmm. Since there's going to be that refundable tax credit component, Paycheck Protection Program funds cannot cover.
Right. They have to be accounted for when you're doing that calculation if you receive that sort of credit. One thing I don't think I mentioned, we made clear, is that as far as salary, in terms of what you can get recovery for, it's limited at 100,000. Mm-hmm. So
prorated for the year. So yeah,
which is rough. I think it comes out under something like 15,800 and something for 8 weeks, on a weekly basis. Mm-hmm. But so we want to make sure that we get that out there, that people understand that it is $100,000 max. Yeah. Let's see. This is the tax relief, which I really don't dive into that much, other than I know that we get that. One thing I know that we have deferred payroll taxes, which is
Through the
nice.
end of 2021. Yep.
And so
Yeah.
that's cool.
It is. So I guess just to kind of do a broad sweeping overview of the tax relief, as we mentioned, one component to keep in mind with the taxes is that wages that you pay as part of the Paycheck Protection Program, if they're standard wages, they're going to be normal payroll tax and income tax calculations and withholdings, but they're not eligible for forgiveness. Whenever it comes to some of these payroll tax credit programs, so there's the employee retention tax credit, which is available to some businesses if you are not taking advantage of the EIDL, the disaster loan program, and if you're not participating in the Paycheck Protection Program, you have the ability to potentially take advantage of this employee retention tax credit. And essentially, to be eligible for that, you have to be a business that has seen either a complete shutdown during a quarter, or you've seen a drop in your gross revenues of at least 50% in any given calendar quarter compared to the prior year quarter. If that is you, if you're not participating in either of those other programs and that your business meets those qualifications, then essentially anybody that you keep on payroll up to 50% of up to $10,000 in wages for that employee can be credited back to you against your payroll tax burdens, and it's a refundable tax credit. So for some people, that might make the most sense for them. There's also the sick and the family leave requirements, which I don't think is outside of the scope of what we're diving deep into and during this webinar, but the tax relief purported there is that for any of the sick or the family leave that you're paying out on behalf of employees or as a sole proprietor, if you're taking advantage of it, there's room for sole proprietors to benefit from that as well. That is a refundable tax credit that's going to be paying for that. So from the employer's perspective, you will not calculate employer FICA taxes, payroll taxes on any wages for that sick leave or that family leave due to coronavirus. And any of the, and in each quarter, when you go to file your payroll taxes, your 941s with the federal government, all of the withholdings that you've withheld throughout that quarter from employees' paychecks will be compared against the credit that you've accrued. And then you will be able to keep those withholdings. And then whatever the difference is, if you have an excess credit compared to the withholdings that you've been tracking for the government during that period, then you'll be refunded the difference. And then as Christine mentioned, all payroll taxes, as far as remitting them to the IRS, we have a deferral in place for that. So they need to be paid by the end of 2021. But in the meantime, businesses have some wiggle room there to potentially defer the payment of those payroll taxes moving forward.
So my takeaway from that, Morgan, is that you can strategize.
Mm-hmm.
You may want to do the loan,
Mm-hmm.
or you may want to seek tax relief.
Yeah.
And you may want to talk to Morgan about what might be the better way to do that, or your CPA or some other bookkeeper.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing, you mentioned something that made me think of, documents and getting things set up now to get the forgiveness. One of the things I wanted to mention with the forgiveness is what we've done, and I've heard, and Morgan, you can speak more to this, is set up specific account, like a COVID-19 account, so that the expenses go in their usual place, but then also get put there, so that at the end, when you go to seek the forgiveness and you have to show you spent your money, it's already there, and you don't have to, assemble all the documents from a box or whatever. If you have things electronically, you can set your accounts up now so that you're in a good position, and whatever other documents you have to show relative to COVID-19 in terms of, how it's affected your business because of, the governor's order or school shutdown or whatever that you have.
Yeah, the best practices that we're advising clients on, there is that idea that whenever you get one of these when you get the PPP loan program funds, it might be a good idea to set up an additional bank account to deposit those funds into, and then try to route as many of the approved expenses that you're going to be applying for forgiveness from through that bank account. It just creates a little bit of clarity in the paper trail there. However, just having that trail through the bank feed isn't going to be sufficient. You do need to make sure that you're retaining the specific documents from each of those institutions that you're paying, bank statements, mortgage statements, utility bills. You need to make sure that you're tracking all of those and making sure that they're compiled, because that's very likely going to be a component of your forgiveness application. When it comes to like your accounting or your bookkeeping system, generally speaking, you should have a detailed enough chart of accounts in place that those expense accounts are pretty clearly outlined. Your utilities are one, your rent is one. payroll is another that's usually split out. So it's very useful to make sure that you're maintaining those books. You can run profit and loss reports for specific periods and see, but what the banks are most likely going to be interested in are going to be explicit details of totals that were spent, and then they're going to want to see the individual documentation associated with each of those expenses.
Yes. Ellen, I sent you that link to where you can get the portal, and there's a PDF. I don't know if you saw it. I emailed it to you just to let you know, so that you can put that website in the chat.
It's posted.
Okay, great, thank you. So the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, the reason we're talking about this is the unemployment benefits, what's already been mentioned. You know, you get up to a $600 a week supplement to the unemployment benefits because of the federal government assistance under the FFCRA. And as I said, apply to the state. If you're not in Arizona and you're on this webinar, you know, apply to your, if you don't know who to apply to, the Department of Labor has a list of all of the state employment agencies. There's an extra 39 weeks, but the language that I saw, it's up until you get federal assistance up till July 31st, 2020. So I'm not sure how that comports with each other, but so at least till July 31st, 2020, you can seek the $600 benefit or see it come through. And then I don't know if you have to do something extra, there's a potential for an extra 39 weeks. If there are small business folks on the call, if you can show that, you know, providing any of the paid leave would jeopardize your business, you can seek to have an exclusion and some dispensation from this obligation, but it's a high standard. You're going to have to basically say you're going to go out of business if you have to comply. Here's a list that hopefully you can read. It's really small. I want to reiterate that if you have a question and you're on the phone, that you can hit, is it *9, Ellen, or #9? I can't remember. And after,
press *9 if you're on a phone to raise your hand, and we'll see it.
Okay, great. And then, so these are the lists of the how you can show that you have a reason and that you're unemployed or you've lost employment, in terms, maybe you're working part-time when you were working full-time, or you're working less than the part-time than you anticipated. You can seek to supplement your income, not supplement, but help with the pandemic unemployment benefits. And this will all be done through the state, not the federal government, through the state unemployment agency. And that's why all the websites are down and you never get through to the calls, because everybody's trying to submit their application. So I want to reiterate, unemployed, partially employed, or unavailable to work because of COVID-19, and it has severely limited your ability, you are eligible for unemployment benefits, even if you didn't pay into the unemployment insurance. So if independent contractor, self-employed, you are eligible. If you worked, right? So you have to show that, and I don't know what the state is asking for. I don't think they're asking for much right now, but we will be checking and seeking tax records at some point. I don't know. I haven't heard much about the verification process with the Arizona Department of Economic Security. I'll mention down here, the individuals who receive sick leave or other paid leave benefits that provide them less pay than their customary work week may still be eligible for unemployment benefits, as will the individuals who are teleworking but are working less hours than the individual customarily worked before COVID-19 pandemic.
We did get a question just come in from Jeanette. Jeanette says, what about a realtor that has lost transactions because a client's lost unemployment? Could I apply for the 2 months of benefits, or will I need to be going out of business? PPP won't work for me. You should be eligible for unemployment benefits, Jeanette.
Yeah, you sound like you're independent contractor or self-employed. And you also may be eligible for an EIDL loan.
And then I see, okay, Ellen, how does the hand raise work? I see Jeanette had raised her hand and Caroline just raised her hand. If I click on chat with them, does it allow them to speak?
Oh, I do see it now. Yeah, you should be able to chat with them or ask them. Can you unmute them from there?
I'm trying to see. Okay, Caroline put her hand down. Jeanette, oh, no, hand is up. Let's see, Caroline. It doesn't look like I can unmute you, but I can open up the chat with you. Unfortunately, I think that you guys will need to put your questions in the chat there for us to respond to them.
Yeah, I don't know
Okay.
as far as unmuting folks.
I do not know either. Sorry about that, everyone, for attendees.
Yeah, we don't normally unmute people, but I did want to see if we could, because I did suggest to some folks to share their stories, and that if they're not able to do that, I'm disappointed and I apologize. If you can see something, Ellen, that will help us to do that, that'd be great.
Oh, so Caroline is saying she is a realtor and she applied for unemployment as she lost transactions as well and she was denied. Caroline, it's very possible, and maybe you can put a little more information on here as far as when you applied for unemployment benefits.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, there's been a definite staggered effect in terms of when 3 weeks ago. So it's very possible that the State Department of Economic Security hadn't fully implemented these new requirements yet. I've been seeing reports about this all over the United States of people getting denied even though they do technically now qualify. I would say stay on the unemployment office about it. You do qualify for it. It might be a little bit of a fight, but at least hopefully some of those benefits can come to you retroactively if nothing else.
Yeah, I'm going to say the acts were passed and the unemployment benefits were clearly outlined. And the Arizona Department of Economic Security was still saying, when I looked, when we first started doing these webinars, I think it was like around the end of March, they were still saying that self-employed independent contractors don't qualify, because that's what usually is the case. But we're in a whole new world, and you know, whenever you applied or whoever looked at the application might have made a mistake. I don't know, but I would keep on it and reapply.
And the clarification here too, I mean, we've already discussed how in Arizona specifically, the unemployment benefits are capped off at a pretty low amount, but then you'll get that additional amount. I have seen, since you both mentioned the transactions that you lost, that is proof that you are eligible to take advantage because you've had a reduction in income. However, just for clarification's sake, any income, potential income that was lost is not what they're basing benefits on. Benefits are all based on retroactive income. So you are going to have to, historical income. So it needs to be demonstrated that you were in business for yourself, that you had sole proprietor income, that sort of thing, for them to base those benefits off of something.
Right, and that's what you'll probably have to show, and maybe it's, you know, and then I don't know how they're verifying, like I said before, but you'll want to, because you are making basically an oath to a government agency. You don't want them to come back and
yes. We got another question from Stacy. Stacy asks, so should we encourage our staff to apply for unemployment benefits if we have work for our employees, but because the hours are reduced, can they collect unemployment on the reduced hours? Yes, that is what the new law says. Whether or not the state unemployment office is fully accommodating that yet is still a little bit up in the air, but it definitely, they can pursue that. They are eligible for benefits. She says, my employees still want to work as much as they can, but work's down 50%. So you do qualify. And also, if work is down 50% in this quarter overall, if you're not taking advantage of those other programs, you might look into taking advantage of the employee retention credit. Also, will our unemployment rate increase with all the unemployment claims submitted?
no, it doesn't go against an employer's account. These programs, they don't go against. And nor, I should also add that the loans aren't considered income normally, and rather the forgiveness. If you get a PPP loan or you get the advance, it's in the act itself that it won't be considered income that you'll be taxed on, which that's unusual. You're normally, if you have any kind of forgiveness of debt, that's considered income by the IRS, but not these particular programs, not loans of these particular programs.
But somebody did have a question in there about unemployment insurance. If their unemployment insurance benefits, generally, yes, generally unemployment benefits are taxable income.
Yes, I would say yes. I'm not a CPA, but I would say yes.
Yes.
Would that be more for you, Morgan?
Yes,
My-
the answer is that generally yes, unemployment benefits are taxable income.
everything, IRS wants to make everything income, so pretty
Yep.
much yes, but not under this program in terms
Yeah.
of the loans, forgiveness of the loans.
Yeah, the loans are separate, but just someone else had asked about unemployment benefits.
Yeah,
If-
no, I completely agree. I have these like general questions up here as other possible factors to consider in making a decision about what you're doing going forward and how you're doing it. You know, an employee's family situation, you know, the employer mentioned, you know, unemployment benefits that can provide some relief, especially if they have to stay at home. And, you know, there is the paid leave. So there is that sort of balance. If they're at home and they have someone to take care of, then they're eligible for the paid leave under the FFCRA, which we didn't go into because the focus of this was really more for the self-employed and independent contractor. But if you have questions relative to those sorts of programs, please follow up with us. One of the things I've been seeing is that people who have offline businesses are doing things now online, you know, courses. I heard of one hairdresser who is sending out kits, like DIY kits of the hair color, and then, you know, going on Zoom to help folks who, you know, need to color the hair and not getting to the hairdresser like folks normally do. And so you just really want to look at your customers' needs right now, and because those have changed, and actually call them and reach out to them and see what it is you might be able to strategize and do and help them, and actually, you know, develop a new line of business or service that you can continue on after. Do we have, I think that was, I don't think I had any more to add. I was just going to open it up to the question and answers right now. If we have more.
We just got one. Stacy is asking, she says, I've given up my salary to pay my employees instead. Should I apply for unemployment? I have applied for a PPP, but I did not get confirmation of receiving it. From my understanding, if your income has reduced, Stacy, you should be eligible for unemployment benefits.
Yeah, I would say the same. But that is a tough question. Because especially now, because, you know, the loans are on hold, and, you know, there's a chance that you will get help, but for this next month or two. And I mean, I've even considered it because I hired a few people right in March, and I'm like, maybe I should take less income to make sure that they get paid, and then how will that work? So I appreciate and empathize with you, but it would make sense to me that you should be eligible for unemployment benefits. But I would just be cautious about, you know, decisions you're making. And then when you're filling out things and what you're saying, if you feel like you need to add an explanation, do so that nothing comes back on you because you didn't understand it entirely. Because these forms, I can tell you, the EIDL form, I was going to actually share screen, that they're pretty straightforward, the EIDL loan. And if you YouTube EIDL loan application, you get a series of videos. I want to look to,
and the application's not even active right now anyway.
but it's good to see the application. I wanted, because I do think, and we don't know, Morgan, as Morgan said, we don't know if it's going to be reactivated because there's such a queue of people in there. So I don't want to put people's hopes up that you will be, but I have heard that there may be another tranche of money after this tranche is used up, right?
Yeah. And in general, like Christine mentioned, the Paycheck Protection Program application, it's also pretty streamlined. It's a 2.5-page application. It asks for some general, you know, attestations and information about the business. And a lot of the banks that I've been seeing have actually been sending out a couple of spreadsheet templates to kind of walk you through the payroll calculations to figure out how much you're entitled to. And they've got, you know, lines in there telling you explicitly what to fill in, what date range to look for, and that sort of thing. So you can just kind of compile your payroll reports for a period, look at that and plug the numbers in, and then you send that spreadsheet back to the bank. And I've helped some clients fill that out, and it's been, you know, 10 minutes worth of filling in the spreadsheet information.
Morgan, is it showing right now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so this is the application. I wanted to share with folks. This is the PPP application, generally speaking, that the lender is responsible for. They might have it in electronic format, you know, if you go online. And that website I shared with you before about the smart assets, the folks there, they have a streamlined process that you just, you know, I think it took me 10 minutes to fill this out. Just because I had my payroll from the third party.
Package from Gusto.
Yeah, so it was pretty easy. Like I said, there's questions here that you have to, you know, certify. And as I said, if you're speaking with your lender, if you have to add a document to explain something, do it. So that you're transparent and you've let them know exactly what your situation is and what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because you're not clear exactly if you should or shouldn't, but this is the circumstances that you're facing and this is what you need help with.
Natasha is asking, is the new EIDL loan different from the original? I need a little bit more clarification on that question, but to give you a broad overview, disaster loans in general are a program that the SBA has had for a long time. The current disaster loan program is similar to the historical program. It's geared towards coronavirus relief, and it's the part of the program that there's that grant component that's an advance on it. It hasn't changed in much from what we've been seeing beyond the last 8 to 12 weeks. So if that's what you're asking about, it's not a new disaster loan as of, you know, the last couple of weeks. It's the same one that has been discussed for the last several months, and it really is an iteration on a program that's been around for many years.
I wanted to say one thing. So here's the old. Here's the old.
Okay.
This was the traditional disaster business loan application. It's not like this. It's
very streamlined.
Yeah, it's like a page and a half, and it took, again, a different application, but very quick. I wanted to share too the YouTube. Go ahead, Morgan.
She posted a clarification. She said, so the original, she asked, you said the original loan was for up to 10K. Today you said up to 25K. Sorry for the confusion on that. No, the original disaster loan was up to $2 million, but actually further guidelines have come down and they've now said that they're not going to grant disaster loans in excess of 15,000, I think was actually the last thing that I saw. So I've actually really seen, as far as being a loan program, the disaster loan program is really not even functioning right now from what I'm seeing. It's mostly just grant disbursement. It's up to $10,000 in grants, but it's based on the number of employees that you have. When you fill out that application, if you said that you have 2 employees, you're eligible for $2,000 in a grant, in the grant portion of that program. I have not seen anybody yet proceed into an actual formalized loan through the disaster loan program in the last couple months.
Except for the folks that got a lot of money already.
You have some that have had the disaster loan. I personally have not seen anybody get a disaster loan.
No. So let me see. Who is these guys?
The PPP I've seen a lot of funding for.
Well, here's the loans that were distributed, the PPP loans by state. So you can see here, 19,280 and for, what is that? That's too many.
For clarification, for people who are asking about the disaster loan, all of these numbers are for the PPP, not the disaster loan program.
Right. The disaster loan program, I'm not sure I haven't seen any real statistics about it. And I do know that people have received the advance, and they still, even if you receive the advance, you don't have to pay that back, right? Even if you don't get additional proceeds that you're seeking. So the money that you received, you get, and you get to keep. It's money to sustain you. And they've limited, as Morgan said, to $1,000 per employee. So if it's just you, you'll get it. You applied soon enough and you're in the queue, then you'll get $1,000. If you have more than one employee, then you'll get the $1,000 for each employee. And that, again, is through the SBA.gov, not through the lender. And it's not open right now. And we don't know if it will be reopened.
I thought that these numbers on the PPP that you're displaying were really interesting. I'm not sure if it's a little bit, again, outside the scope of this webinar, but it's of a major concern to sole proprietors, especially that really sole proprietors were pushed to the back of the line when it came to
Right.
being able to apply for the PPP program. You know, and by the time a lot of sole proprietors were even eligible to start submitting applications, the majority of these funds had been called for already. What we have seen based on the statistics for that they released for the first round of funding, right about almost 3/4 of the total funds dispersed were for loans in excess of $350,000. So that's basically for people who were paying $35,000 a week in payroll expenses, businesses of that size. Over 75%, almost 75% of the funding went to those businesses.
Well, and here we have a list of by industry of the businesses that receive funding and approved loans. So this was something I just found this morning, and I shared it with Morgan, and I thought I would share it with folks now that we're at the end.
It's very,
I would like, it's interesting that they put lender 1, 2 through 15, but they don't say who they are.
So now that you mentioned that, that's kind of funny because some of the questions we're asking earlier about Wells Fargo applications, Bank of America, we're actually seeing in the last week or so that groups of small businesses are collectively suing the large four banks in the United States under allegations that these banks unfairly reshuffled the priority line of Paycheck Protection Program loans, saying that they prioritized businesses who were seeking larger loans because it increased the amount of fees, lenders' fees that the banks were going to be able to take advantage of. But those are allegations and it's a lawsuit. But if you look at the lenders, the average approved size being $500,000.
Yeah, I think there was a 206,000 up there. But yeah, there's a lot of, when I heard that the funds ran out, I submitted a FOIA request to the SBA.gov to find out, okay, well, I was asking specific questions. What lenders, when were these applications approved? When were they submitted? And blah, 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 blah. So, but I haven't heard anything yet, but I will follow up with them. And I've said on our Facebook page, contact your legislator. McSally's around, Sinema, find out, are they holding these banks and the SBA accountable? Who's being held accountable for how things were distributed? Now, they had plenty of guidelines, but why small businesses weren't able to actually apply until a week after everybody other businesses were, or the providers. I'm not really understanding altogether, because that's where the most need is, and that's where most of the employees are the small businesses.
And it's a good reminder too to kind of be careful about how you look at the way things are presented in the news. There's been some news that's been trying to tout the program as having been very successful for small businesses, saying things like, over 75% of the loans granted went to very small employers, people with under 50 employees. That's true when you look at the volume of loans. Over 75% of the loans granted were to very small businesses, but it was only a quarter of the actual funds that were actually dispersed. Right. So there's a lot of there's elements of spin there. And so it was nice and hopeful to see with the new bill that potentially a segment of that bill, $60 billion from what I was seeing, is being set aside to be prioritized by smaller community lenders, smaller banks, with the goal that that's going to help some of the smaller businesses. But again, that's $60 billion out of a potentially $320 billion program.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's a lot of questions that can be asked, and I'm going to suggest to people to ask them, to their lender and to their representatives. Do we have any more questions?
Natasha just asked, do you know why you would be denied the $1,000 per employee? That is a grant program with very limited funding. So it's a first come, first served, who got their applications in first.
Yeah, if you have your application in, and as I said, we put in the chat there, you can check on the status, I think, with the EIDL, if that's the grant you're talking about. So I'd be curious if anybody decides to go ahead and look to report back to us if they were successful at all in checking the status and receive some helpful information. I will be following up to see if we can, with the one we submitted. But yeah, if anybody has any updates, we'd be happy to hear them and share them on our Facebook page.
And Jeanette, you've asked how to share a recording with a friend. I just again put in there Ellen's email address. You can email Ellen for a copy of the webinar.
Oh yeah, and we're putting it up. We're gonna have a resource page that we're working on to put up so that people can go to and actually download things. Uh-oh.
Skype is calling.
Right, it's calling me. Skype never calls me. What happened? Everybody, thank you so much. I'm gonna have a last request for questions. Ay, ay,
Phone's ringing off the hook.
ay. Sorry. So everyone, thank you so much, and thank you for the questions. We wish you all the very best. Please, you can follow up with us and ask questions where we are in business, and we're still working. Morgan's where she is. The website is at the beginning. If Ellen could put in the website address for Morgan business, that would be great in the chat. And Morgan, thank you. You are wonderful and very knowledgeable, and I really appreciate your time today, and look forward to working with you again and keeping folks informed about what's going on. I think next week we're going to do one on insurance claims.
All right, I am signing off. Thank you everybody for the time and the questions, and thanks again for inviting me on, Christine.
Okay, Morgan, thanks again. Bye.
Have a
Be
good one.
safe and be well, everyone. Thank you. Oh, I think we're doing if anybody's still on and wants to do the poll, I think we're doing the poll. Ellen, I didn't hear you say anything, so I didn't do anything about the poll. So I'm putting it up there, but if anybody wants to take a poll, we'll be sending a survey out. For those of you who are still on the webinar, if anybody still has a question, you can submit it because I'm still here. Ellen, are you still there? Let me see if I can look at the chat. Oh, thank you, Ellen, for putting in the email address. So you're still there. I went ahead and, oh, thank you for voting. I see that folks have voted. I very much appreciate your time. Take care, be well. I'm going to end the meeting now. Thank you.
I see you. Hello?